here at the eFutures conference, where leading academics are talking about the latest advances in sustainable technology. Our focus today is nuclear power, which, like renewables, is a low-carbon alternative to fossil fuels. Like fossil fuels, however, nuclear power, or at least conventional fission power, makes use of a highly concentrated fuel, uranium.
A nuclear reaction does not release CO2, but there are carbon emissions involved with the construction, operation, and decommissioning of power plants. However, even when taking all of these processes into account, the carbon emissions level of nuclear power is only 40 grams per kilowatt hour, 10 times less than the level for fossil fuels. It's because of this low emissions record that the IPCC considers nuclear power a legitimate method to help mitigate climate change. Multiple organisations have produced estimates that the UK cannot live off its own renewables alone, and so questions remain about where the rest of our energy should come from. Imported renewable energy, such as solar power from deserts, could be one solution, but would require significant infrastructure to transport the energy here. For a country willing to entertain an increased reliance on nuclear power, there is ample evidence that it could protect from both price fluctuations and political uncertainty abroad. In addition, the incredible energy density of uranium allows a single centralized power plant to provide a gigawatt of power, equivalent to roughly 500 square kilometers of onshore wind turbines. But since uranium, unlike the wind, isn't being constantly replenished by the sun, we must be aware of limitations in its supply.
Uranium is quite interesting. The known uranium, if used in normal nuclear fission power stations, would only provide a year's worth of world energy, but we know there's at least 10 times that, so 10 years. And then there's a lot of uranium in seawater. Whether we could extract it, we don't know. But this 1 to 10 years instead of the 10 to 100 years means we ought to be looking at advanced nuclear systems.
While problems of supply definitely exist for nuclear power, this is not the most immediate issue in most people's minds. Despite advocating its use, the IPCC concedes that concerns over operational safety, proliferation risks, and waste management represent barriers to the expansion of nuclear power. In the UK, our current fleet of nuclear power stations produces roughly 5 million tonnes of nuclear waste a year, but only 3% of this is the dangerous high-level waste that we're familiar with from films and TV. There currently exists no long-term storage programme for nuclear waste, but they are under development, with the first long-term repository set to open in Finland in 2020. While this may be worrying, it needs to be viewed in context, because fossil fuels have a far bigger storage problem. Fossil fuels have the huge problem of where to put all the carbon dioxide they produce. Nuclear waste, while dangerous, is produced in much smaller quantities than carbon dioxide, and as a result is far easier to store. Sequestered carbon dioxide will also require significant monitoring so that it doesn't escape its geological repository. Of course, this doesn't mean that we shouldn't use CCS, but it may be worth ensuring that we need to rely on it a bit less in future. It is essential to quantify risks when planning the structure of energy. The Europe-wide Extern-E project has in fact produced figures for the number of deaths resulting from each energy generation technology, in terms of the power that technology delivers. Perhaps most surprising is that some renewable sources on this scale are more dangerous than nuclear power. It's important to remember that no power source is without risk of any kind, even renewables. Since they are less energy intensive than nuclear power also, the deaths per gigawatt are raised significantly on this graph. The Chernobyl disaster of 1986 showed that while nuclear power has great potential, if used incorrectly it can have devastating effects. It is hard to quantify the death toll of Chernobyl beyond the original 31 people who lost their lives during the disaster. However, estimates based on the increased rate of cancer in the area have reduced a maximum of some 9,000 deaths. Nuclear power is not the only source that has caused such widespread damage. Neither has it even been the most dangerous historically, with roughly 3 times as many deaths resulting from the breakage of hydroelectric dams. Biomass also has a poor historical record.
You know that there's quite a lot of use of biomass for cooking, and in many areas of the world that's done indoors, and here's an example, this family cooking over an open fire indoors, no chimney you'll notice, and this is a very, very, very bad thing, but very common, still very common even today. Now, I'll show you in a minute that this is apparently getting worse. The World Health Organization estimates about 2.5 million premature deaths each year as a result of exactly this practice. 2.5 million people die cooking on biomass.
None of this means that we shouldn't use biomass or hydroelectric power, because we know that there are ways to apply them safely. It would be a mistake to simply write off nuclear power for the same reason. We should be sceptical of any attempt by the nuclear industry to play down the risks of their technology, and we should apply this skepticism to other energy sectors as well. It does not, however, remove the fundamental advantages that certain technologies hold. Despite the good safety record of nuclear power since Chernobyl, work is underway to produce new forms of nuclear power that are fundamentally safer. They would also produce less waste and use more abundant fuels. Thorium fission is a prime example of this kind of nuclear power. Unlike a uranium reaction, which will continue to run unless it is stopped, thorium needs a constant energy input in order to produce fission. This makes it intrinsically safer than conventional reactors. Many people worry that uranium and its product, plutonium, that are used in power plants, risk being converted into nuclear weapons. Thorium, by contrast, can never be used in a weapon, although one of its products, uranium-233, can. However, it is so difficult to do this that the US military abandoned research into thorium in the 70s, precisely because they had trouble making a bomb out of it. So what's the problem? Only that working thorium reactors do not currently exist. Scientists have made the case that while technical problems may exist, there aren't any fundamental barriers to the development of thorium reactors. According to the Thorium Energy Amplifier Association, lack of funding is the single biggest problem that thorium power has. Many scientists are already at work on a further stage of nuclear power. They intend to create a form of reactor that in no way could be used for weapons, and use fuel so plentiful it would last for tens of thousands of years.
What is fusion power?
Right, so fusion power is when you take 2 small elements and you stick them together. When you stick these 2 elements together, they just give off a large amount of energy. Some of that mass turns into energy and they come flying apart again. So the easiest type of fusion to achieve is deuterium-tritium fusion. The only problem with that is there's no tritium in the whole planet. So I have to make as much tritium as we use. So what we do is we take our fusion plasma and we surround that with a blanket of lithium. And when the neutrons come out, they bump into these lithium atoms and they make tritium.
So what are the advantages over other forms of nuclear power?
So compared to traditional fission power, fusion will produce, well, it will still produce radioactive waste because we have neutrons flying around. However, that waste it produces will be less radioactive than the fission waste, and it will be safe to recycle after approximately 100 years. We can reuse it to build new fusion reactors. It's just very difficult, challenging, technical thing to perform. We're heating up plasmas hotter than the centre of the sun, and we've got very strong magnetic fields. Once we get this thing working, it will be very sustainable. The fuel sources basically come from water and lithium, which makes the tritium.
The thing to remember about nuclear power is that the newer forms of it are both incredibly safe and sustainable. However, despite huge potential benefits, a lot of research is simply not getting very much funding. While nuclear fuel is incredibly cheap for the energy it delivers, the big costs in nuclear are the construction and decommissioning of the plants. The IPCC, however, proposes that both nuclear and renewable power stand to become cheaper through the introduction of a carbon price. A carbon price would essentially charge firms for emitting CO2. As long as the cost of emitting is kept greater than the cost of investing in low-carbon electricity, renewables and nuclear will be able to compete with fossil fuels. Indeed, in many cases, they stand to outcompete them.